Welcome to Fort Ward, which is a premier Civil War site in the city of Alexandria, and it's a major destination and orientation site for visitors who want to learn more about the Civil War defenses of Washington. We're the only site that has a museum or a visitor center to help interpret, not just our site, but to illustrate for the public these important points about the defenses of Washington. Fort Ward was named for Commander James Harmon Ward, who was the first Union Navy commander to be killed during the Civil War. He was actually a very well-respected naval officer. He was an authority on naval ordnance. He helped to found the Naval Academy at Annapolis. In fact, if you go to the Naval Academy today, there's a hall called Ward Hall named for him. We're standing right now in front of an orientation map display that visitors very often find interesting because it sets the scene for the history of Fort Ward and wartime Alexandria and the history of this defense system. One thing that I think this map really illustrates is how extensive this network of Union forts was. But it's even more thought-provoking, I think, to imagine what the Washington area was like in the spring of 1861 when the Civil War began. If you saw this very same map, none of these forts would have been there. Washington was essentially defenseless at that time, vulnerable. So President Lincoln and his officials in Washington anticipated the eventual secession of Virginia and prepared for it. And in the early morning hours of May 24th, 1861, thousands of Union troops were dispatched into the area of northern Virginia, pretty much from where Alexandria up through Arlington up to Chain Bridge was located, to begin getting a foothold in that area for the protection and defense of the capital. At first, just a very few forts were built. No one anticipated that this was going to be a 4-year war, but things really changed during the summer of 1861 with the Confederate victory at the Battle of First Manassas, or Bull Run, as it's also known. This kind of put everything in a different perspective. It was seen that there was more of a need to defend the capital. So in the late summer of 1861, even more forts were built. And actually Fort Ward was begun at that particular time, along with a number of other forts on the Virginia side. One important point about the defenses of Washington is that it really transformed the whole Washington area into a military city in essence. You know, you had the seat of the federal government here, but with this huge ring of forts and all the camps that also accompanied those forts, you know, Washington really becomes a logistical headquarters for the Union war effort. It becomes a major camping and training ground for the Union Army during the Civil War. Thousands of Union soldiers passed through Washington and Alexandria during the Civil War, which was such an important resource to the Union because of its transportation facilities, its port. And you can see actually how many of these forts, including Fort Ward, were eventually built to also kind of surround the town of Alexandria during that time. The earthwork remains of Fort Ward are our most significant artifact here. You know, we have between 90 to 95% of the original fort walls preserved. And some are in better condition than others in different parts of the fort, but there is enough significantly preserved here that if someone walks the site and they've got an engineer plan from the period in front of them or a walking tour map in front of them, they can absolutely make sense out of the design of the fort, the format of the fort, and then the Northwest Bastion really gives them a full picture of what the fort would have, other preserved sections of the fort would have looked like. We're standing at an orientation exhibit on the history of Fort Ward during the Civil War to give our visitors a little bit more of an idea of what the fort looked like and how it was documented in terms of restoring the fort. This model shows the design of the fort as of 1864 and 1865. This is the improved, expanded version of the fort, which made it the 5th largest fort in the defense system. And you can see this is the type of design that would have been called a bastion star shape. Each one of these triangular areas projecting outward, containing the various gun emplacements, and this whole concept of projecting and re-entering angles, which provided for the protection of every aspect of the fort and providing crossfire. Also on display here we can see several important documents that illustrate visually what the fort looked like and how it was designed. In the National Archives today there are important military engineer plans that document the design of the fort and also the design of the fort's ceremonial entrance gate. The restored bastion of the fort, the northwest bastion that we're going to be seeing, is this bastion directly over here, which would have faced out towards Leesburg Turnpike, present-day Route 7. So the fort located on an important strategic high point of ground between two major access routes to Alexandria and the Washington area. This is the ceremonial entrance gate to Fort Ward. It's been reconstructed from a period military engineer plan for the fort, so it's an authentic pattern. It's situated on its original site, so that's important. It helps to give context actually to the preserved earthwork walls of the fort. This is the actual spot where soldiers would have entered the fort during the war years. We're standing now at the reconstructed northwest bastion of Fort Ward, and this is an excellent, authentic example of what the interior and exterior of one of these forts would have looked like. One of the important elements of any fort would have been an underground room called a powder magazine. And so right now I'm standing in front of the entrance door that would have led underground to a long, narrow room where powder, bags and barrels of gunpowder would have been stored. This was one of the most dangerous rooms in a fort. There were lots of rules and regulations about who could go in to one of these rooms, what they could carry with them. No arms, no weaponry, nothing of metal, okay, that might scrape against something and give a spark. Obviously no smoking, no candles or anything of that nature. There was actually in the summer of 1863 a powder magazine explosion at a fort that was located near Alexandria. It was called Fort Lyon, and it was the result of a careless accident that had occurred in one of these forts. So it just kind of underscores the importance of the rules and regulations that were put in place for soldiers stationed at a fort like Fort Ward. Gunpowder from the magazine would then be taken over to another underground room, again typical of forts in the defense system and elsewhere, called filling rooms. So here we can see another door that led down into an underground room where ammunition would have been filled with gunpowder and then the loaded ammunition stored in a room like this. This is where artillerymen would have come to have gotten their live charges to take out to the cannons for either artillery practice or during battle situations. Moving a little forward into the interior of the bastion, again, this gives our visitors a great picture of what the interior of a Civil War fort would have looked like. You would have had gun platforms with the various cannons and guns located on them. In the Northwest Bastion, we're looking at replicas of the types of guns that would have been installed here during the Civil War period. So you can see these three large cast iron 4.5-inch guns. You can also see a couple of examples of 24-pounder howitzers and a little 6-pounder over here to the right of me. Between the gun platforms, you'll see ledges, and these ledges are called banquettes. These are where infantry or armed artillery who were also trained in infantry tactics might have stood during battle situations to fire over the fort walls, or perhaps just, on an average day patrolling, doing guard duty. We're standing on a breast-height ledge overlooking the reconstructed northwest bastion of Fort Ward. And here you can get a little bit of a sense of how high up we are. All of these forts were built on high points of land for purposes of better visibility and maximum firing range, indeed if the forts were attacked or marched upon. Here, this bastion faced out towards Leesburg Turnpike, present-day Route 7, and although today we really can't see Route 7 from here, Leesburg Turnpike from here, it's only about a mile away. We've got trees and high-rise buildings today, but during the Civil War, the land around forts like Fort Ward was completely cleared of trees for maximum visibility and field of fire. So from here you could have actually seen all the way down to Bailey's Crossroads during the Civil War, so several miles down the Leesburg Turnpike, a major access route to Alexandria and one that stretched all the way to the Shenandoah Valley. We're actually standing in the area where the military support buildings were located during the Civil War, right back behind the fort, near the entranceway gate to the fort. And we're standing specifically in front of a reconstruction of a small officer's quarters or officer's hut that would have been really typical of the type of shelter that would have been built for officers stationed in the defenses of Washington. Now we have this little quarters furnished inside to give some idea of what an officer's daily life might have been like. So when you look at some of the contents, you'll see that they've been functionalized to reflect some of his daily activities and some of his work activities as well. Today, I think it's also important to note that out of all these forts, this extensive defense system, very few of them still exist. Many of them were destroyed due to development that had encroached on the Washington area during the 20th century. And so it's very fortunate, that we have Fort Ward